Good afternoon, everyone. Today, a treat. I have with me Bob Kudla, tradelikeagenius.com. This is our third year to get together to discuss crop losses and things, grand solar minimum, markets, grains. This is an update that most people have been waiting for, and I'm so happy it's the end of the year now so we can get the wrap up. We've had the early season blizzards, the propane shortages in the Midwest, civil unrest in 21 different countries across the planet. Exports in India of onions causing civil unrest, and everywhere you look, it's about the food, it's about the food, it's about the economy, the trade of food for the next economy, contractions, and everywhere except the United States is looking pretty, well, teetering on an edge right now. The U.S. is a bubble in itself, how well it's doing, but when you look out at the greater landscape in the world, we start to see a lot of things with food price increases and people not very happy about that. TradeLikeAGenius.com. If you've never traded before and want to take advantage of these types of profits every day in the market, I urge you to sign up for one of many Trade Genius online educational courses. Right now through Black Friday, you can save 50% off their bundled specials. Use the promo code Black Friday at TradeLikeAGenius.com. Tell them Adapt 2030 sent you. Crypto, options, ETFs, and the traditional markets. And on to the interview with Bob Kudla from TradeLikeAGenius.com.
And we own some other cryptocurrencies, in terms of when you talk about smart contracts are going to be absolutely in vogue. That's just basically the new escrow in there. They're not going to allow the corrupt port officials to hold up a transfer payment because somebody bribed them that was taking delivery. Guess what? Your stuff left the port. It was agreed to that it was all there. It got there. The same stuff's there. Everything's still padlocked. That money's moving. Here's your stuff. That's a big game that's being played in Asia where you don't win a deal in Asia when you sign the contract. You win a deal in Asia when you get your money. And so a lot of times what they'll do is they'll find reasons to not accept so that they can grind the price. Well, I think where you're going to see, Dave, is those smart contracts, they're going to require an approving authority at where it's leaving the port, not when it gets to the new port.
Yeah, payment first will be the go.
Right. So your official in your country is going to be sitting at the port of Los Angeles saying, here's 2 million tons of wheat on this barge. Do you agree? Yes, I agree. Boom. It's padlocked. Boom. The smart contract's in effect. When it shows up in Shanghai, okay, then that contract, that shipmaster says, I arrived, the padlocks are good. Guess what? Boom, that money's gone. It left escrow, it left your account, and here's your stuff. You can screw around with the ship if you want, but I sold you grain, I'm getting paid. Because that's the level of trust that won't be required, that when things get push come to shove, people aren't going to trust that somebody's going to go through a deal. And those smart contracts are going to be the way it's going to be, because you can't move stuff around. With a smart contract, is you can't bribe a banker, you can't bribe anybody, because you have 15,000 nodes or somewhat that says it's good to go. And that's what's going to happen. So cryptos are going to be just fine. What you have to do is be a trader until we get this next push higher. And look, when rich people start doing this, and we're going to start having options contracts next year in Bitcoin, there's commercial interest in this. People know the dollar is last man standing. You and I talked about, so what, the U.S. has all the gold in the world. We're not letting any of that gold leave the country, okay? So it's going to have to be some other way of doing it. The reason why we got off the gold standard in the first place is because France showed up and said, I want my gold. I don't want your treasuries. I want your gold. And Nixon said, no problem, we're off the gold standard. And so that's what's going to happen again. Gold is great, but gold's never going to leave the country. So you're going to need a medium that's going to be trusted beyond the commodity, and that's going to be some sort of gold-backed crypto. And we're starting to see those concepts starting to come to fore now too, Dave.
Yeah, I think that's a new movement forward, and especially digital finance, where they have, like DAI, something like this, where you can come out of your gains into something with a stable coin that's running as an autonomous contract outside government control as well, where they can't shut it down. Because I've had a fair few people talk to me about exchange problems, and we've seen it since the beginning of how many exchanges have gone up, how much people have lost. Now, I want to talk about capital controls for a second, because you hit on India there for a second. They made all the high denomination notes illegal in India, and they confiscated all those, and you only had a certain amount of time to go into the banks to turn them in. Now, I was just traveling over in London and down to Totnes, and I did a 3-city speaking tour about the grand solar minimum. I presented in London, and then I did a couple other cities down there. The thing that I found, because once I was leaving, I had a bunch of change, and I had all these 20s and whatnot in pound notes. So I wanted to change them into £100 or something like this. And they told me, we don't use £100 notes anymore. And I said, awesome. How about some £50 notes? And they go, oh, those are rarely used anymore. And I said, what? A £50 note is difficult to get? They've done the same thing that India did. They relegated everybody to the super, super, super small money. Everybody's running around with a bunch of 20-pound notes. 50s are considered like wow, you got a 50. That is strange. And using euro is the same thing. There's no more 200 euro notes. Those are gone. The 500 euro, out of circulation. Again, they gotten everybody back down. 50s are common in euros, a little bit higher denomination than the pounds. But try to go find and cash in 100 euro. They look at you like you got 6 heads over there for 100 euros. Like, we don't have change for that. It's too big of a note. Everybody's running around with like micro change everywhere down there. It's startling how difficult it is to get larger denomination notes, especially to travel with. And see, that was the whole thing is I didn't want a whole stack of 20s like this big of pounds. I want that thing locked into a couple hundreds where I can walk through and it's real thin in the money belt. Not possible. Hundreds don't exist anymore. I'm shocked. So we got the same capital controls. And again, Litecoin is going to be halving here along with the Bitcoin. Litecoin's going to have first, then we got the Bitcoin halving. And again, everything I've done with this study through history, the food prices during the Maunder minimum spiked to 7x. And then they came back down again. So far, Bob and I, we've been talking about 1.7x or doubling of food prices, maybe tripling on a wild time. But imagine if it really went like it did across the capitals of Europe in 1680 when everything went up 7x. How do you think our economies would be able to handle that? Because there's way more people in the world right now than there were in 1680 or 1640, 1650. There were less than 1 billion people at that time. Now we have almost 8 billion people, and they're all going to be scrapping for food at the same time. So perhaps this 7x would be a far low number. Perhaps we're going to get to 49x on the food pricing or something exponential, because the population of our planet compared to those prices is exponential, and our food availability and grow belts and grow zones are shifting to shrink that availability. So I don't know what you think about where the food prices could go. And again, it's all about the fiat currency devaluing, because gold, silver, and crypto are going to hold the value while everything else around it just inflates up. So a 7x or a 49x increase in your food price, if you were holding something else of value, it really might not matter to you, because that's just the paper that's hyperinflating away for some of these prices. Take a good look at Zimbabwe. So where do you think we could hit on the food pricing, and how do we protect ourselves?
Well, yeah, I mean, the way I look at that is that it's hard for me to imagine anything more than what's happened historically. That's how you look at trading. You can't perceive something beyond what has already occurred. So you have to use that as a baseline. And so the things that I look at from like a positive standpoint, I said, okay, what do we have now that we didn't have in 1680? So we have better food storage, we have better food management, we have better fertilizer, we have better transportation, and we have the ability to link food distribution globally. So I said, so that's a good guy. On the bad guy standpoint, as you have to think about, is the when the trust falls, China. If China suffers, the United States probably will export some of its excess. But if the U.S. failed, China absolutely will not export anything to the U.S. So, you have to start thinking in terms of nations going to ground. And so that I take that off, number one. And number two is that nations that aren't on the dollar standard are going to suffer at that higher end of the X range. Okay. So I'm still looking at 5 to 7X, Dave. Okay. Because I think we're better at, okay, you know what, France, you can't grow wheat this year, but you know what? We're pretty confident you can probably get barley out of the ground, right? Or we're starting to see this sprouts technology come to fruition where, and you're starting to see it in some of the nations that have what I would call poor pasture, be able to take sprouts and grow them in 7 days inside of an encased warehouse and be able to feed their animals. So you might start seeing where, hey, you know what, it doesn't make any sense to me, at this price to do that with sprouts, but at this price, it makes sense for me to build these warehouses and to feed that way. So I think some of those things will cap, but I think we're going to see large parts of the world suffer enormously. And I'm going to talk China for a second, because I think China's going to be an interesting case study on how well this is going to go. China built the Belt and Road to be able basically to forestall the last food famine they had. So they're buying up as much ag land in China as they can. They're bribing every country along their rail route, through Pakistan, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan and the reason why they're suppressing the Uyghurs is because they want to make sure they know that food's coming through there. And the last thing they want to have is Islamic militants destroying their ability to get food into mainland China. So it's very strategic on their part. Evil, but strategic. And
can I toss in a caveat there, Bob?
Sure.
There's a 2,000-year rain cycle repeating in there, and what they're finding is the massive floods. They're constructing new dams all across in Xinjiang to capture all the extra water to start to irrigate new zones. That if you look back in the previous dynasties in the Warring States period, go back to like 600 AD or even further back, right along the Silk Road trading, those were forests in what is now desert, pasture lands, orchards, running rivers, monasteries, cities that have been long abandoned that are covered by sand. But those rainfall patterns are coming back to the same area. So add in the caveat of controlling the food supply, because they're not going to want to have to share it with the people who are indigenous that live there, because food's going to be so valuable that they're setting up new grow zone there along with the transit point. And that was my extra bit there.
Yeah, and they're probably going to need it, because in Africa, the local population will not easily acquiesce to all their food leaving their countries. And I have a neighbor of mine that goes to Namibia every year. He spends months there. He does a lot of certification for people, a lot of the German tourists that come down and do parachuting, paragliding, and things of that nature. And I asked him, I said, are the Chinese in Namibia? He goes, yeah, they're all over. And he said they keep to themselves. They said wildlife from 5 miles around any Chinese settlement is gone, because they don't feed their people. They make them go out and hunt their own food. And he said they don't hire any of the locals. Anything they grow or they manufacture goes right back to China. So China imports their own labor, and they're basically strip mining these countries, and they just pay off the elites. Well, when push comes to shove, I think China's going to lose the ability to control Asia, and I mean Africa. And I think that's going to be really interesting to see how China deals with that. At the same time, you're looking at, I think Europe's going to go offline too. Europe has zero ability to produce enough food for themselves. I think the French are the closest, ironically, and so they're going to be looking to Africa. The French and the Germans are big into sub-Saharan Africa, trying to create grow zones themselves. Well, all that stuff's in areas in which they used to colonize, so there's no love lost there. So I'm looking, I think the Eurasian landmass is going to be an interesting animal, and Russia's just simply going to go offline. they're just not going to be able to grow anything. And so, I think we're blessed living in America because we have this entire north to south to kind of shift, and it's relatively safe. I laugh at people. I said, hey, Southwest of the United States might be the safest place to be in this grand solar minimum because we're going to push the temperate belts down, and we're going to see more rain. When people think we're going to go dry, I think we're going to become wetter, and we're seeing it. We're getting rain now, and we're getting 2 years ago we had like copious amounts of rain, and I think those grow zones as they push in are going to cause Eurasia to have big issues, and I think Africa is not going to be open to all their food being exported, and whole sub-Saharan Africa is going to go green, and they're going to find a hard bargain with you. You watch, Europe is going to. You talk about the migrants going from Africa to Europe. You're going to see the migration from Europe into Africa for people to be able to survive. Because you look at Algeria, I'm sure you talked about it in your show this last couple of weeks. I mean, the place looks like California Sierras,
Record
Algeria,
snowfall again with that Medicaid that came in there, yeah.
And Saudi Arabia again, and so, yeah, it's going to be really interesting. But if food prices are going to go up, people have zero ability, Dave, to handle it. And the central banks can't keep printing currency and try to import food with it because it's not going to be accepted. And I don't know if I talked about when we began this, but that's what's going to end the central banks. It's not going to be hyperinflation from too much printing. It's going to be hyperinflation because they can't afford to pay to import the food. And then it's lights out for central banks. And then the reset happens, and who knows the consequences of it. It's not going to be pretty.
Yeah, and the desert Southwest there, where you referenced, that's a 4,000-year rain cycle called the North American monsoon that is now shifting. And like generally, I'm going to bring you all the way back to the beginning when you were talking about the arc storms that are coming in. You got the first set of storms this week, another set, and then a third set out there. Well, NOAA has increased the arc storm ferocity from a 5 to a 5+. So they also know that they did this about 2 years ago, that there's going to be more heavier, intense storms coming. So instead of having something that's so far out the range that it doesn't fit a category, they've created a new category for intensifying arc storms. But the interesting thing is, instead of them coming directly west-east like they normally do, you see a lot more precipitation coming up from Baja, straight slamming right into Nevada, New Mexico, Arizona there. That's that North American monsoon shift. And that is going to continue to get wetter and wetter and wetter and soak that desert area. And again, if you don't want those fighters and resistance force down in North Africa, mainly males have left that area. So they get 4 million men out of that area so far through unchecked immigration. Seems like a strange thing, and a lot of the problems that it's causing throughout parts of the world where it's becoming almost too many migrants in a certain place where they're outnumbering the local residents now of certain countries. That's by design. It's to get all those foreign fighters. Those guys in Northern Africa would resist, and they are ferocious, and I give them respect for what kind of fighters they are. But the resistance force has been exited out of there so far, 4 million men. That's twice as big as China's army have left through immigration out of the Northern African new emerging grow zones. They're never going to come back. So when you look at that, it makes sense with the immigration now. So when you take a look at immigration in a completely different way of depopulating resistance out of a new emerging grow zone, it's a brilliant chess move on the board, a little bit nefarious, like you said. But you got China now. Then here's where it comes. China's there, and the EU wants to be in there where their own old Roman grain growing belts are. So you got two powerhouses down there fighting for the same new emerging grow zones. Plus, the locals probably want to come back. So we're going to get a whole contentious issue of who's going to try to own that land down there. And Libya is the wild card with that primary water source oozing out of the earth. They could use that for an enormous amount of irrigation across Libya. And then with the increasing rainfall, wow, you could, and I did the numbers crunching on that. If they actually do just North Africa, forget the sub-Saharan part, we could push over into Sudan and Chad and include that if we want to, all the way down into Mauritania, fine. That would be more than all of North America and Canada grows for grains. You have to realize that would be a substitute for all of North American grain production, because they would have multiple seasons because it's continuously warm, continuously sunny. It would be like the best growing conditions of Southern California or the best of growing conditions in Arizona, which used to be a breadbasket about 100 years ago. They even used to raise ostriches there. So think about the possibility of how much food could be abundantly produced if they got the water under control out of Libya with its water source, plus the above ground rain increasing. You know, we might think of the scarcity and grow zones going offline, but there's going to be a substitute in so many places. Like look at Yemen and Oman. I mean, those are coming on as new grow zones. And it just never stops. Look where the politics on our planet is taking place, and you'll see exactly where the new grow zones are emerging. It's now I'm starting to take my research in an entirely different direction here.
Yeah, look, you know, don't ever confuse people who are listening. Don't think politicians and bureaucrats are stupid. They are not. They're just nefarious, and they know what's going on. They're head faking people. So you know they know exactly what's happening with the climate changing. They just want you to not be prepared until they can get in front of you. And the only and I agree with you. You know, I say I'm gloom, not doom, because I think there's going to be this overlap of unpreparedness. But, you know, those zones will have to be re-domesticated, if you will, in terms of being able to be effective. You know, it's one thing to have Yemen be a great breadbasket, but if they're constantly at war, you know, it does nobody any good. And the same with the, you know, the Northern African states. You know, they're fairly hostile to the West, for many good reasons, you know, because they were subject to colonialism, and so those areas are going to have to all be renegotiated, and so you're going to have some issues, and there'll be war there. I mean, look, you know, if the Europeans are starving, they're gonna rediscover their armies, okay, and they're a lot closer than China, so it's gonna be really interesting to see how this plays out. And you know, in the United States, I think we're just going to see this gliding back and forth. You know, I joke with people all the time. I say northern western Mexico, southwest United States. I said, people say, you're going to move because of climate change. I said, no, the climate change is moving to me. And this is going to be an ideal area. And I agree with you. I've been telling people for years, I said, watch where the hurricanes are hitting every year. They're gliding up the Baja Peninsula, and they're curving in more into Arizona. And I said, as this thing happens, you're going to see more and more of that. I mean, look at this late storm we're having. A November hurricane out of Baja's Eastern Pacific, unheard of. You know, it didn't have the punch, but that moisture is meeting winter cold mass. It's just going to rinse out right over SoCal. You know, beautiful thing. So it's going to be fun. Hey, and Dave, I'm going to have to scoot off on this, but I definitely want to talk more. I mean, this is some incredible stuff. I know we didn't get into trading, we didn't get into trade genius and all that stuff. Maybe we can do an add-on to this maybe in a couple of weeks. But this stuff's important stuff, people. Don't let the surface answer satisfy you. You have to go deeper, and you have to trust what you're seeing here. The grand solar minimum is driving everything you're seeing in politics. You just aren't told that. These people know what's going on. You know, the people in the NSA, the CIA, the Chinese Secret Service, the German Secret Service, these people all know what's happening. They're all preparing. But they don't want to scare their populations. And what a great way to do it is totally head fake them. Give them a 180 on this stuff until it's too late. And they got in front of this thing. If they told people now in 6 years there may not be enough food to eat, can you just imagine?
Yeah, the society would fall apart today, not in 6 years.
Yeah, so I leave you with that thought. So the government, who knows? They may be giving us a backhanded compliment by not telling us, but just don't believe them, and you need to prepare. And maybe, Dave, we can talk next time. Let's talk some solutions, because there's some really incredible technology that's coming out that even in your own homes and your own yards, you could produce 20 or 30% of what you need to eat without being a farmer. And that all that takes the load off of everything. And so there's always hope. I'm an optimist. I see the world the way it is, but I'm always preparing to make sure that either I can protect or profit from it. Basically the heart of a trader. So I'll leave you with that, Dave, and thanks so much for giving me time for us to talk. It's been too long, and we got to do this again soon.
Yeah, Bob Kudla here, tradelikeagenius.com. And my last parting thought is, this is the greatest opportunity in human history. There's more people on the planet now that are going to need more services, more goods, more ideas, and more solutions as we move through this transition period here. And talking about indoor vertical farming, I believe this is going to be a gigantic new industry that's going to come out to try to retrofit buildings, homes, just like you're talking about. Could be sprouts. I have the vertical tubes in my back growing as well. We have 108 different holes coming out of the tubes to do different types of lettuces, different types of superfoods, Moringa oleifera, Guinura, Goji. There's like an enormous amount of things you can grow. But most people don't have the time, effort, but there's an opportunity. So what's your skill set that can blend in with this transition period? And, do take a look at the news feed, because it gives you a lot of indication on where the most likelihood for change in agriculture is happening or will happen on the planet. Anyway, Bob, thanks for your time. I learned a lot today talking to you about a few ideas I had. I had some personal questions in our interview, so thanks for dropping in the nuggets there. Anyway, thanks for watching. Hope you got something out of the video. And Bob and myself will be back right around the holiday time, and we'll be sharing a bottle of wine online here while we talk at our next interview. Until then, see you next video.
Prost.
Prost! I'm going to Czech Republic here.
Yeah,
and I've been speaking with Bob Kudla from tradelikeagenius.com. Learn to make money every day with the pros. Use the promo code Black Friday for 50% off non-bundled items.